Man, Path of Exile 2, just what a fantastic way to wrap up this year. I mean, seriously. I've got nearly 45 hours logged now since the game launched last Friday. Well, okay, to be honest, it was a total disaster on Friday and I didn't actually get to play until Saturday morning. After over 6 hours of trying to play PoE 2 and being unable to due to the delay and then the server queues and then the game refusing to acknowledge that I even own the damn thing, I just gave up. I went to bed and promptly woke up the next morning at 4 a.m. to start playing, at which point, finally, all my issues were fixed and I could play the game thanks to the ownership bug getting hot fixed and all that. And then from that point forward, man, has it been an absolute blast. Like, holy crap, I cannot believe how much I'm enjoying this game. There have been some rough edges in need of ironing out, but overall, I gotta say, this is hands down one of my favorite games of the year already, and it's only like 50% complete at this point. There's still a whole lot more PoE 2 to be had, which just blows my mind. Like the fact that we're gonna be getting 3 more acts in the campaign still, double the base classes, which in turn brings 6 additional weapon classes for us to try with the other classes, plus the 3rd ascendancy for each of the existing classes, plus the 3 ascendancies coming for all the new classes being added, all the mixing and matching of that, in addition to, I'm assuming, more new endgame activities to partake in. I just like, man, wow, wow, really. Today I want to talk about my experience with PoE 2 thus far, what I like, what I think could use some work, some major pain points, as well as GGG's response to some of the biggest issues that have been raised by the community. Hey, before we go any further though, it is once again that time for a word from today's sponsor. Today's video is sponsored by the folks over at Holzkern. This is an Austrian company who specialize in watches and jewelry made from natural materials, utilizing a variety of gems, metals, woods, and stones. Odds are pretty good you've actually already seen me wearing one of these, as I've owned a few pairs over the past couple of years, and I wear them in my videos. So whenever I'm flailing my hands like this, you might see one of them on my wrist here. I really enjoy these. They've got unique designs. I like the look of the watches and how they mix in the various materials. The one that I'm wearing currently is the Navona. The frame of this watch is stainless steel. It is an automatic watch, so it self-charges with movement and can be hand wound. It has a gray and gold dial and is all accented in this maple wood. I just think these watches look neat. Simple as. A few noteworthy details as well. Holzkern products are made in small quantities to ensure that every item meets a high standard of quality and that it will last you a long time. All of their products are made from natural materials, as mentioned, and therefore each one is quite literally unique. They make both watches and jewelry pieces for men and women, and there's quite a large variety in styles of products to pick from. So whether you want one for yourself or would like to give it as a gift for the upcoming holiday season, now is a great time to pick something up. Holzkern is offering free express worldwide shipping straight from Vienna. They're even going to cover the customs fees, and products typically arrive within 2 to 5 business days. They're even promising that all orders placed by December 19th are guaranteed to arrive by Christmas Day. And if you use the discount code FORCE, you'll save 15% off at checkout on all purchases site-wide. Use the link below to check out what they've got to offer and get one for yourself or for someone else. Shown at Advent site. Okay, so back to the video. Like I said, I'm really enjoying PoE 2 so far. I've played for about like 45-ish hours, and that's even considering that I was doing other stuff over the weekend. Not sure exactly how or where I managed to squeeze in this time, but regardless, I did. And yeah, I've just finished up the quote 6th act. It's actually the 3rd act, playing through on the 2nd difficulty because they're still to add those additional acts. And I'm now beginning in earnest to play the end game. Now, this video isn't going to be like my full thorough review. I'm going to save that until I've played a bit more here, but I want to give you some of my early thoughts. Starting with the likes, the things that I'm most impressed by. Right out the gate, I gotta say, they get an A++ when it comes to the environments, the enemies, and the bosses. For each of them, the presentation, the tone, and the variety, it's all fantastic. Beginning with environments, I mean, really, I like pretty much all of them. I would say my least favorite might be some of the desert regions in Act 2, but aside from that, I think most of the areas in this game look really good and are visually appealing. Probably my favorite ones are like the swamps and gothic buildings of Act 1, and then the dense jungle ruins of Act 3. I think a shining star for me, though, was definitely the steampunky temple infused with electricity that you get to right after fighting the Chimera boss in Act 3. I mean, this place was cool as hell. Really, really dig spending time in there. When it comes to enemies, the variety here is great. I mean, frankly, it feels like every single zone zone. I don't mean act, but the individual zones. It feels like each one of them has their own unique mix of enemies and new types. I mean, I was constantly coming across new ones the entire time playing through the campaign. And the fact that there's going to be even more when the additional campaign zones get added into the game, I almost can't believe it. But yeah, they were not kidding in highlighting the high number of unique enemies that they have here in PoE 2. Also, on that same note, bosses, these are just like, wow, some very memorable encounters here, really engaging and entertaining fights, also very challenging at times, a lot of them very challenging. Assuming some people are still playing through and haven't seen everything though, I don't want to spoil too much here, but I will highlight one of my favorite boss encounters, and that was against Mektul the Forge Master. So this all starts out by you entering this molten vault. You're going through, eventually you come across this crucible full of lava, you pull a lever, tips it over, and then all of a sudden that lava is coursing through the dungeon, going through this reserve, and you can actually in real time watch it as it moves through this canal until it eventually reaches at the other end of the dungeon this massive reservoir. Now, following it along that way reveals a boss hammering away at the wall that's actually holding the lava back. When you enter the boss's arena, he then finishes his hammering until he smashes the wall open, which causes the lava to start making its way towards you. And then you're fighting the boss, dealing with all of his attacks and abilities, having to dodge stuff on the ground, while also constantly moving away from that encroaching lava. Not the first time I've seen something like this, but nevertheless, it was really cool. And this is just like one of the 50 or so bosses that are all unique that I've come across. And there are many, many more that are worth highlighting. But again, I don't want to spoil too many for you, and this isn't my full review either. The second thing I really like is the combat. I mean, this just feels very good. The improvements that they've made from PoE 1 to 2 in terms of combat feel are very drastic and very noticeable. It's an entirely new game, literally, but also just in the sense that it feels like drastically better moment to moment than it did in PoE 1 in my personal opinion. There's a much more pronounced sense of impact and weight while playing this game. I mean, I'd consider the gameplay feel to be on par with Diablo 4. All the hate that the game gets, I do think Diablo 4 makes good feeling gameplay. Even just like basic attacks with starter skills feel good when you're smashing enemies. And I think PoE 2 has done it just as well here. It is very satisfying. The animations, the sounds, the low input latency, it is all great. I mean, a big part of the reason why I've sunk so much time already is because it feels so good to play. I just want to keep on playing. Speaking of which, let's talk about the class build and spec options. They're great. So I've already tried a few classes. I started out by making a warrior, and I played all the way through up until Act 2 with him. Was really digging it, but also wanted to try some things before committing to any one class. So I spent a couple hours then playing as a monk, a couple as a mercenary, and then finally I swapped over to witch. Now initially, while playing the witch, I was just going with the basically what the game presents you with. I was summoning minions, cursing enemies, and throwing around some of the variety of bone spells that I had at my disposal. I mean, this really is what the game presents you with, the occult skill tree being what's essentially your default. But then when I was thinking of which ascendancy I wanted to use when I reached that point, I thought that the Infernalist looked pretty cool, and I figured why not start going with some fire spells? Well, there weren't too many in the occult tree. In fact, there's only one as far as I'm aware. So I then pulled up the elemental tab, and lo and behold, I had full access to all of those skills as well. So I started picking up some fire spells, mixing and matching between the two trees. And then I spent a little bit of time looking around for some build ideas, and then I saw 4 words that sounded very appealing: tanky, fire, summoner, witch. Yeah, okay, great, I'm sold. So I started playing around with that idea, and I also happened to see that Kriparian was going with a similar idea for his Infernalist. So I took his build, started playing around with it, mixing and matching some things, coming up with my own combinations of what his base foundation was, and what I've ended up with has just been so enjoyable, so much fun. So basically, I am a witch, I'm using my summon skills, I'm summoning minions, but coupled with the fact that I'm tanky as hell, and I've got a lot of fire elemental skill type abilities I'm using as well. So for starters, I'm stacking defense. Health is going all the way up. I'm picking strength nodes when I don't need agility or intellect for any abilities or mods. Going full strength because strength equals health, and wearing mostly heavy armor, so I'm stacking up my armor value as high as it can go, while also using a massive tower shield in my offhand and a scepter in my main hand. So I've got my summons, a lot of the bomb throwing arsonist, coupled with my hellhound from the infernalist ascension tree. And then for my fiery spells, I've got flame wall, which is modded into a fire ring. I've got solar orb, which pulsates damage in an area, and then flammability, which is a fire damage debuff that I can apply to harder hitting enemies and bosses to make them take more fire damage. But also, because I'm tanky and having a big old shield, I also have access to shield abilities. So I'm using shield charge as a move skill. This lets me actually avoid attacks fairly reasonably in addition to my dodge and just walking around. But also I can shield charge to slam into enemies to help build up their stagger bar quicker. I also have seismic cry, which is an AoE knockback. It does some slight damage, but mostly it's the fact of providing a buffer for me so that enemies don't hit me or to protect my minions. This has been very useful. And then I also have the ability to raise my shield, which is just a passive you can do at any point when you have a shield, and it will block all incoming damage from the direction that you're facing. Then finally, I've got the raise zombie ability modded so that they are infused with fire and will explode into a fiery ball upon death. And all of these things come together for a very enjoyable playstyle. I'll be running up to packs of enemies, throwing down my circular flame wall, watching all of my minions go in, mostly my arsonist tossing bombs at them, my hellhound charging in, as I'm walking through as a super tanky big old shield in front of me, summoning up these fire zombies as like a frontline defense. It's just so damn cool. And this is just the first real build that I've really tried out, like the first Ascension, and I'm already in love with this one. I imagine there's many more that I would really like to try out as well. And at this point, I just can't believe that this is only the beginning, and we are going to be having twice as many weapon trees to play with in the future, as well as those additional ascendancies and the 6 other classes with their ascendancies. It's just, man, I can already see from my limited perspective that there's going to be so much potential here for mixing and matching and trying different builds. It's really, really exciting. And then also playing into all of this is something that I really like, which is the general overall slower pace of things. And this is movement and combat, difficulty, everything. They've really leaned into that slower pacing, and they're very much so trying to distinguish this from PoE 1 and to make it its own separate thing. Movement in particular is a big standout. There are very few movement skills coupled with rather large maps, and the skills that they do exist seem to have a decent cooldown as well. Really, the best you can do if you want to speed things up even remotely is to try to get move speed on your boots. Just recently, I got some boots that gave me 20% move speed, which is nice, but I heard it can go higher, over 30%, so I'll keep an eye out for those. But yeah, it's slowed down, and we're not just talking about walking and moving through maps, but also the clear and kill speed is reined in as well. Even as the build starts to come online, it still takes some time to kill things. Bosses in particular are very, very, very tough, and you should expect to die quite often in this game. Just the baseline difficulty is really challenging, but I like that. I do quite enjoy that. Now, those are my likes. I do want to talk about some dislikes because there have been some pretty big things that have stood out in the first few days. Number one would be the lack of loot, especially the first couple of days as I was getting started and making my way through the campaign, and then the campaign the second time on the higher difficulty. You would go like entire maps and get like a handful of blues, maybe a yellow if you were lucky. Now, I have gotten some orange pieces of gear, but those were few and far between. They were not dropping very often. But then not just like even the loot drops themselves, but also the crafting materials to enhance and upgrade your loot, to increase the rarity, to add new attributes, to mix and match things, to socket them, like all of that stuff. Like, it was just barely dropping. You weren't getting a lot of loot. It really was a drag. I think especially considering how large the maps are. They were not kidding in those early reviews and previews. The maps are humongous, very, very large. In fact, I would argue that the default maps that they have feel like they're like 30% too large. So you're not getting a ton of loot, coupled with the fact that the maps are massive and there's a lot of empty space. And even when you are getting in fights and encounters with packs of enemies or elites, they're not dropping much because there's not a lot of loot. And those two things in conjunction have been a bit of a drag early on. And then also something I do want to point out is that the game has had had a handful of bugs that I've noticed. One thing that really stood out was my character at times not casting their spells where I'm aiming them. And I'm not just talking about like, oh no, I had my cursor all the way on the other end of the screen and my abilities range didn't go that far. Why not? No, I'm not talking about like ability range. I'm talking about like literally I would have my character try to be casting a spell to the left and the spell would be cast to the right at a random spot. And I would be like, what just happened? I'm so confused. Oh, and then also there's this weird thing where you will just get body blocked all the time. Now, body blocking being a thing, it's like a design decision, right? But the fact is like the game has a dodge roll, but you can't dodge roll through enemies. So it's kind of useless in situations when you get surrounded by packs. The only real advantage that the dodge roll gives you is to try to get out of an AoE before it goes off, before it triggers or whatever. So those are the biggest things, some of the bigger complaints and pain points early on. But here's the kicker. It's crazy. Most of these have already been addressed. GGG has already dealt with them. We got a pretty big update earlier today with a blog post in conjunction with an early patch and a future patch with more fixes coming down the road. And they pretty much address like all of the major issues, the lack of loot, the map size. They don't reduce the map size, but they are implementing something that's going to address the wandering around and lack of stuff. And then also with the lack of with the increase in loot, it's pretty much all getting better. They've pretty much addressed all the big concerns that I've had early on. So they start out the blog post by saying that after they launch and they ironed out all the server issues and things got smooth, up and running, everything was fixed, they then took some time to look at most of the feedback and make some changes accordingly. So here are some of the things that they've done. Number one, dodge roll changes. A lot of players were expressing frustration about being trapped by monsters. While it was intended that monsters can trap and kill you, they felt like the frequency was a little too high. And the TLDR of these changes are you are now going to be able to dodge roll through some of the smaller monsters and push aside some of the tiniest ones, such as the adorned beetles in Keth. And as a result, you should find yourself getting trapped less often. Now, you can still be trapped, but it's going to be from the larger monsters. So if you get several large monsters surrounding you, at that point, you will be trapped and you're going to have to figure out another way around, either killing or forcing them aside or maneuvering yourself or putting some barrier between you and them, which there are some abilities that do that. Again, pushbacks and barriers and things like that can take care of this issue. But now, at least with these dodge roll changes, you should be able to move through some of the medium and smaller monsters. The second change they're doing is checkpoint changes. A lot of players were reporting that they felt it was really tedious having to retread areas of the map. This leans into the discussion earlier about the map sizes feeling a little too big for my liking. More in particular, it's not so much the size of the maps, but they didn't feel rewarding to explore because of the lack of loot. And there was a lot of backtracking if you happen to find yourself going in a direction that isn't towards the objective or the exit that you were looking for. So to deal with this, they're actually making some changes to the checkpoints. Now, all throughout maps are various checkpoint locations. These act as respawns, as well as places to refill your flask. Well, in the future, they're going to be adding a patch that makes it so that these actually work as fast travel locations. So clicking on a checkpoint will allow you to teleport to any other checkpoints in the area that you've explored in the minimap. Also, checkpoints have been added to all entrances and exits to the zones to allow for that teleportation. And a checkpoint has been added to a midpoint in the first Dreadnought area as well. Oh my God, dying in the Dreadnought area and having to go all the way back to the beginning of it with no checkpoints in between. Boy, that it happened a few times to me and I didn't love it any of the times. So this is a welcome change. But really the biggest thing, them adding now fast travel between the checkpoints will make it so that if you do happen to go off in a direction that isn't whatever your objective is that you're going towards while you're exploring, you're at least now going to be able to head back without just having to do the long haul by foot through empty space and there being nothing to see or do en route. So that is a very welcome change. Item changes. This is a huge one. This in conjunction with some rare monster changes and currency changes really address what was feeling like they changed their name from grinding gear games to just grinding games because there was no gear to grind. Meme points there. All right, so for starters, the item changes. One of the major problems that players have been experiencing is feeling that the game is not rewarding enough. This is an area we have to be very careful when adjusting because it's very hard to reduce drops if we increase them by too much. We have identified a few key areas that we believe will significantly improve the experience players are having. So first, they're making some rare monster changes. This doesn't so much impact the campaign, but particularly when you get to the end game and you aren't coming across so many unique monsters, they're making it so that the rarity bonus per rare mod has been doubled. They've added a 10% quantity bonus per rare mod, and they've also increased the chance of rare monsters inherently having more modifiers as you progress through the end game. The end result of all of this is that you're going to be getting better loot more often as you're progressing through end game, and this is going to scale up as you move into the higher levels because it previously wasn't, and people were pushing the higher and higher difficulties, but it didn't feel like they were receiving higher and higher rewards for that challenge. In fact, they barely were getting any loot, it felt like, and this was a real big complaint from I'd seen from players who had reached into the end game, so this should help address that. They're also making some currency changes. Mainly, there's going to be a lot more currency dropping, and this currency in turn allows you to craft items, enhancing them, taking normal ones to blue and then blue to yellow, and then adding more attributes to them. All of this, all around, you're going to be getting way more of everything. The Regal Orb drop rates were increased around 40%. Disenchanting of 6 mod rares will now give 2 Regal shards instead of 1. The Lesser Jeweler Orb drop rate increased 33%. They did reduce the drop rate of Chaos Orbs slightly as they are less valued, and so that it doesn't consume too much of the rare currency drop pool. This causes currency such as Exalted Orbs to increase somewhat. Gem Cutter Prism drop rate increased by 500%, and then with this, Gem Cutter's Prisms now increase the quantity of gems by 5% instead of 1%. Then there is the Unlucky Drop Protection. They say one of the major issues we have identified are outlier unlucky drops. A single unique boss dropping badly, especially early on, can significantly affect your character, so they have deployed the following changes. No more than 50% of a unique monster's drops can be gold, and then act bosses and map bosses will now always drop at least 1 rare. And with all of those changes combined, again, the TLDR is you're getting more loot, you're getting better loot, you're getting more currency to make your bad loot good, or to enhance the loot that you do get that has whatever particular affixes you're looking for. Across the board, loot is better, there's more of it, and it's going to feel more satisfying as you're fighting rare packs and bosses and all of those things. And they also directly address the bug that I was noticing with click to move. So basically there was an issue that was showing up where when you had a move only command, it was name locking, and the result was your character, strangely enough, attacking in an unexpected direction while holding down that action. They deployed a change that should directly address that, and since this patch went through, I can report I've not seen my character all of a sudden attack randomly in the wrong direction. So those are the big things out of the blog post, and specifically the things that address some of the major issues that I saw not only from the community but that I felt myself. And I mean, that is just fantastic. Now there's definitely still some more thorough analysis that I want to do for this game, and there's a whole lot more playing that I want to do before we do my full review with my longer list of likes and dislikes, the pros and cons and all of that. But just straight out the gate, like I said, I've been loving this game, playing it for the past few days, pretty much nonstop, what feels like, and having a really good time with it. I mean, I knew the hype was really high for Path of Exile 2, and I was quite anticipating it as well, but I was not expecting to like it as much as I have thus far. I'm definitely expecting myself to be playing this throughout the rest of the month of December, frankly. Like, I'm liking it that much, and already, like, I want to try a bunch of different classes. I want to try the different ascendancies. I want to try different combinations of weapon skill lines, to try the other trees on different classes. Like, yeah, man, I'm just really excited. I'm really excited to play more of the game, to see more of the game, to see what the community comes up with, to be part here of the discovery process as people learn about and try different builds, and we figure out what's good, what works, what doesn't. There you go. That's it. That's it for today. PoE 2 launched last week. I've been playing nonstop since and having a really good time. So I will report back. We're going to have some more videos on this game without question. There's some other stuff I plan to do in the next couple of weeks, but I will also be playing a whole heck of a lot of PoE 2. So expect at least a few more videos from me. But that is all for today. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you all enjoyed. See you next time. Take it easy.